Other things I know that I'm not
Yes, sir. Hey, Mike. Yeah.
I tried. We're doing a golf getaway. Now I'm like in everybody's way.
You'll be fine.
If you could just email Mom for this now. I'm totally kidding. I want him. You ever run sound before? Yeah, here you go. Sure. Don't screw up. Okay. Yeah, I feel you, man. It's just nuts. What do you mean? We're good. I think we're actually, I was going to hook in. I did it last time, and it was, the guy was working at that funeral. Yeah. What's up? Like, here. Yeah. Really? Yeah, because I clearly one of the inputs was and I was like, dude, it's just the input. We just need to do a few. Well, that's what now is not the time. Really? He just thinks he's on that. He is the expert. He's on that. Whatever you get, you must have. And tie into Bible. Yeah, I was getting the main thing. Yeah. And I would like to. I'd like to never walk into the space. It's it is. It's very but I'm just doing it on the space trip. I'm also excited to see that. It's a vintage of look at it. Because I know like let's play standard board. I'll figure that out for me. The whole crowd is going to turn. That's why the guy with the backwards hat on will be like, it's him. That's why I hide in Okay. John Hayes, how are you? Do you like the trade? Good, how are you? We should, man. Last time we did it probably like 2 months ago. Your first. Yes. Doing an airplane. I'm sorry. Lower points. It's like overtime or something. Don't love it. man. I'll be here. I'll be here, man.
Good evening. On behalf of the members, orders of the Religious Coalition of Augusta, thank you for your every effort you are making to join this evening. We are especially grateful to our panelists and guests who travel long distances, and some of us may have had difficulty deciding whether to participate. Your positive resolution also counts as a long-distance trip, a leap in your mind. We are also grateful for the convenience of live streaming to further extend participation. Each year, PRC wrestles with how to increase our relevance to advance social justice advocacy in our beloved community. We are grateful for Dr. Greene, Dr. Paul Harris, and Mr. Mark Everton for accepting our invitation to courageously broaden our understanding on a frequently misunderstood concept, which may be also underestimated as an intersection of politics and religion, that is Christian nationalism. It is shaping what I see that we must understand. This event, underpinning our officers tasked with financial support, is the generosity of Mrs. Pat Hudson. Mrs. Hudson has sustained her effort as a trailblazer in local interfaith activities since the late 1990s. We are most grateful to you, Mrs. Hudson, for your contributions, which enables world-class scholars and activists to invigorate our annual service and tonight's program. May we give her a hand. Also, I'd like to recognize the acquisition of books and arranging the book signing, which is achieved through the enthusiasm and patience of David Hutchison, owner of the Book Tavern, and his supporting staff. The staff of Sacred Heart Cultural Center, led by Ms. Lynn, ensures this impressive venue functions impeccably for both serious and entertaining events. To ignite tonight's presentation, I'd like to share the following short quotes from Buddhist philosophy, the way that Sakura for our foundational thinking. Efforts to reach out and engage others in dialogue with the aim of fostering mutual understanding and bringing people closer together may seem ordinary and unexciting, but they in fact constitute a bold and daring challenge to create a new era of human civilization. He also says, dialogue is a positive endeavor. It builds solidarity and creates unity. To reject others only has negative repercussions. It invites division and leads to destruction. The point is to meet and talk. It is only natural that our perspective may at times differ from that of others, but dialogue interlines to trust among those who don't see eye to eye. We are honored to offer this evening's opportunity during the high Jewish tradition of Yom Kippur for self-reflection and shukut to bestow gratitude for a respectful exchange to explore one of the most sensitive and pivotal topics shaping American democratic participation. We want you to have a safe return home. Let's continue with impactful and value-creating dialogue. And thank you to Mike Montgomery for his technical services this evening. Thank you. Followed by Dr. Simmons.
Good evening. My name is Sid Gates, and I want to thank Joyce, who is our president of the RC, Joyce Wall, for her gracious words, and she is indefatigable in our midst with her work. So again, immense gratitude to Joyce and all that she brings to us. Her Buddhist tradition and her values, called from the military and other sources. I am the vice president of the Progressive Religious Coalition of Augusta, and a founding member. And I echo Joyce's welcome to those of you here and those of you in streaming in. Our PRC believes our community and country benefit from these kinds of programs. Programs championing social betterment from top to bottom. Programs which respect scholarship and factual data and are also underpinned with moral, ethical, and spiritual dimensions, all constrained with the utilitarian greatest good for the greatest number philosophy, and all constrained hoping that the least of these will also be appreciated. Definitely we assert that in our midst here. Our events encompass a wide list of stakeholders, including concern for the natural world and its human justice demands. As Joyce touched on, our primary face in the community is the Dr. King service. It is entitled Keeping the Dream Alive. Dr. King's message still matters. And the Pulitzer Prize winner, John Meacham, this year. And we've had such luminaries as Cornel West, William Barber, Gandhi, Eddie Glaude, Daniel Cleaver, and other social justice champions. Our 2026 keynote will be Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas, who is Professor of Ethics and Society at the Vanderbilt Divinity School. But the PRC has joined with other entities in co-sponsoring debates, symposia, and various programs fostering common good in Greece. The PRC co-sponsored a lecture series for a number of years for the Greene Political Science Department at Augusta University, entitled Today's Issues for a Better Tomorrow. One joint program examining separation of church and state concerns was entitled A Wall Too Tall or Barely at All. Our PRC marked the debut for the congressional debate in the area Congressman Charlie Norwood died, and a special election was called for in 2007. So tonight's event is in line with such events, which I just mentioned. A brief orientation for tonight's program. We will hear first from our keynote, Dr. David Gushee. Dr. Gushee will be followed by Dr. Paul Harris, and our final presenter will be Mark Alberton. I will introduce our final two presenters prior to their respective addresses. Following these three presentations, I will moderate a panel discussion with all three presenters taking part. You should have been given a card when you came in if you would like to write a question or two, and we will get to as many as we can in the panel discussion. Again, Joyce has mentioned this, but there is book signing to follow this program to your left, my right. I heard our keynote at the University of Georgia in April of this year. He addressed some of our concerns tonight, touching on the separation of church and state, nationalism implications, religious authoritarianism, most notably Christian authoritarianism. I attended this event, the former congressman and Presbyterian minister. We went out for a meal afterwards, and conversation kept drifting back to the lecture we had just been a part of. It was such a compelling talk from Dr. Gushee that the minister and I discussed this talk most of the way back to Augusta from Athens, close to 2 hours. For the three of us, the attendees that night, Dr. Gushee's command of tremendous import of the separation of church and state as guardrails in our nation's history was certainly familiar and edifying, affirming. However, his detail of the makeup and ever-increasing assaults on this Jeffersonian principle and resulting consequences proved to be arresting insight for us all. Stigmatizing and thus then labeling pertaining to religious perspectives are often intentional and wedge political division. Such purposeful leveraging is the catalyst often in successful political campaigns, leading to individuals being elected to local and national offices. Ramifications are huge as far-reaching policymaking is shaped by such persons of purported faith. Certain influences with vested interests from the religious side and influences pertaining to political and governance realities coalesce to produce highly controlling forces which many hold abrogates and compromises both sides. Sides often referred to as church and state. So upon returning to Augusta, it's the idea of bringing Dr. Gushee to Augusta with a community event to the board of our Progressive Religious Coalition, and so here we are. Again, thank you for being here. Dr. David P. Gushee is a distinguished university professor of Christian ethics at Mercer University Atlanta campus. He is chair in Christian social ethics at Free University in Amsterdam, and he is senior research fellow at the International Baptist Theological Studies Center, also in Amsterdam. He was conferred a BA from the College of William and Mary by Vega Kappa, a Master's of Divinity from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, a Master's of Philosophy and Christian Education from Union Theological Seminary in New York, and his PhD is in Christian Ethics from Union Theological Seminary in New York. In addition to the ones I mentioned earlier, he has held significant other teaching posts. Dr. Gushee is also an ordained Baptist minister. He is elected past president of the American Catholic Religion and the Society of Christian Ethics. And as of 2025, he is the author, co-author, editor, or co-editor of 30 books, including the bestsellers Kingdom Ethics and the book Changing Our Mind. Other notable works are Defending Democracy from Its Christian Enemies, After Evangelism, The Moral Teachings of Jesus, and Christianity and Democracy, International Perspectives. An upcoming publication is The Travail of Job. Dr. Gushee is an international revered scholar and lecturer. He is frequently quoted by the press for his expertise and impacts numerous social media platforms. He is in great demand as a presenter and panelist for a wide range of secular, academic, and religious groups in this country and beyond. It gives me great pleasure to introduce at this time our keynote speaker for our most timely program this evening, Dr. David Gushee. Dr. Gushee, we look forward to your insights and challenges for us tonight. Please welcome Dr. David Gushee.
Please silence all cell phones at this time. So, it is good to be in Augusta. This is my very first trip to this beautiful city. Somehow, I have never been here before, and I hope it will not be too long until I'm back. I am grateful to the Progressive Religious Coalition of Augusta and to Sid Gates, who has tirelessly worked with me through this process. This Cultural Arts Center is one of the most astonishing buildings I've ever been in. It's extraordinary. I'm grateful that it is here, and I'm grateful, feel honored to have a chance to speak from this platform. I am also glad to be sharing the platform today with Mark and Paul. I look forward to a productive dialogue. So, the title given to this event was Christian Nationalism, Compromising Both Church and State. I'm going to tell a story this evening that affirms what you probably expect with the title of this, but that offers a broader who decidedly do not identify with what is called Christian nationalism. So this talk has 7 movements. You ready? First, let's begin about 70 years ago with the birth of what I want to call modern religious left liberalism. Religious left liberalism. So let's rewind back to the mid to late 1950s, or at least the early 1960s. It's easier for some of us than for others. I know. America began a visible splitting during this period that broke up what had at least seemed like a broad cultural, religious, and values consensus in Eisenhower era America. It began, I would suggest, with the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision in 1954. The Supreme Court demanded that public schools be desegregated nationwide. This was the product of long, hard labors by legendary lawyers such as Thurgood Marshall and organizations like the NAACP. It initiated a ferocious fight that took 15 to 20 years or more in communities around the country, and that in some ways has never really ended. It became part of the broader story of the Civil Rights Movement, which took a major leap that same year with the Montgomery bus boycott and the meteoric rise of the 25-year-old pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. So, you were either for or against the Civil Rights Movement. It was hard to take a middle position, though some people tried. For white people, there were early adopters of support, middle adopters, late adopters, and never adopters. I want to identify strong advocacy and especially active involvement in the Civil Rights Movement and the fight for African American civil rights as being the very birthplace of modern religious left liberalism in the United States. So that's the first one. But there were a lot of other things that happened in close proximity. In the early 1960s, the Supreme Court voted to ban school-sponsored prayer and Bible reading in schools. Some of you know about that. They did this out of deference to religious liberty concerns and the separation of church and state. They did it to protect the sensitivities and rights, especially of children in schools who did not adhere to the majority religion in the local community. These decisions came as a shock to many conservative Christians and their communities. Those religious people who supported these Supreme Court decisions and the spirit behind them can be identified as part of religious left liberalism. So now there's 2 things I'm putting together. Support for the Civil Rights Movement and support for the strong separation of church and state. In 1965, an Immigration Reform Act was passed in our country that opened immigration to the U.S. in a radical way. It ended quotas that since the 1920s had heavily and intentionally favored Northern and Western Europeans and had explicitly discriminated against Asians, Africans, and Southern and Eastern Europeans by law for racist reasons. But in 1965, the new law led to a massive rise in immigration from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. This changed the religious and ethnic makeup of the United States with effects that last to this day in every community. Religious left liberals tend to be people who supported this immigration reform, or who today are quite comfortable and maybe even celebratory of the more ethnically and religiously diverse country that we now have. Okay. Fourth, in the 1960s, the women's rights movement, the second wave, picked up steam. Betty Friedan's 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, was pivotal. The National Organization of Women was founded. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, banned sex discrimination in employment. Women entered the workforce in larger numbers than before, far larger. The idea of male dominance being a right in society and marriage and in many churches was challenged, and it seemed to have largely been defeated. Religious left liberals support the women's movement in all of these changes. Fifth, one of the fruits of the women's movement was the national legalization of abortion in the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision. This decision was the result of careful strategizing on the part of the women's movement and other advocates, and found national paradigm for adjudicating abortion access was debated, but the general idea that women should have the right to determine whether to end their pregnancies was widely accepted and was the principle of the law. Religious left liberals tend to, though not universally, support the Roe decision and abortion rights overall. The sexual revolution also spread during this period. Women's empowerment was part of it, but so was the general loosening up of sexual mores, a delinking of sex and marriage, and the advent and availability of safe, effective birth control. Did you know that it required a Supreme Court decision in 1972 to establish that unmarried people could get access to birth control? Divorce rates doubled in a decade from 1964 to 1974, and divorce laws changed to become no fault. Eventually, LGBTQ+ people began demanding equal access to marriage and to church, and society's acceptance and certainly decriminalization. A longer fight, it appeared to culminate in 2015 with Birchfeld Supreme Court decision. In general, religious left liberals were supportive of most or all of these changes, though of course not all at the same pace, and a lot of them have been debated in churches and in society. But in general, religious left liberals were supportive of most of these changes. The attack on poverty and economic injustice and the demand for policies aimed at uplifting the poor was symbolized by the Great Society by Lyndon Johnson. Much of that effort failed, but still, the 1960s saw the establishment, for example, of Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. Religious left liberals tend to be all in favor of these programs and all such efforts to create a more economically just and fair society. The Vietnam War drove a terrible wedge in U.S. society with opposition growing, and especially intense by the late 1960s. Meanwhile, fear of nuclear Armageddon of the Soviet Union was realistic, especially clear after the close call of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was a baby in Northern Virginia when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. My parents remembered it vividly. Religious left liberals positioned themselves generally in opposition to the Vietnam War and in favor of nuclear disarmament. Finally, scientific alarm about environmental distress began intensifying in the same period, kick-started by Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring in 1962. Government policymakers began debating and passing environmental laws for clean water, land, and air. My father was one of the staff people in Congress who helped to brief Congress on those laws, and he was very proud of that. The first Earth Day was in 1970. Not long after, scientists began warning about climate change. Religious left liberals positioned themselves in strong support of environmentalism. So I've named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 commitments of religious left liberals. If you would say those commitments track pretty closely with your own, would you raise your hand? Well, too bad, because the second movement of this talk, in response to these social changes, the Christian right movement was born. Different figures of the Christian right emphasize different issues at different times, but in general, they reverse mirror religious left liberals. What I mean is, everything that I just described, and most of you raise your hand to say you supported, they took the opposite side. It began, of course, with Brown versus the Board of Education and the desegregation of the schools. The ferocious fight against school desegregation and the civil rights movement in general was often led by Christian preachers and activists, many of them from the South, who made arguments against integration on all kinds of reasons given, like the curse of Ham or the dangers of integration or the Southern way of life or whatever, or even religious liberty arguments. Their arguments lost, but they didn't die. The Supreme Court decisions to ban school-sponsored prayer and Bible reading were ferociously resented and resisted by many conservative Christians and the communities that they dominated, especially small town and rural communities in the South and in the West, but not only there. I can say from living in the small town South in the late 90s in Tennessee, that even then, those decisions were often ignored in schools and in communities. And the exact boundaries of what can and can't be done at the church-state intersection are the constant subject of cultural and legal battles. Christian right ascendancy in America does mean as much of a rollback as possible of the decisions that were made by the Supreme Court in the early 60s. As for immigration reform, which changed the religious and ethnic makeup of the U.S., while not all Christian right folks have taken an anti-immigrant position, some have, either on the basis of America being a Christian nation by God's will, or the historic majority resenting change. And an anti-immigrant posture has certainly ascended since the rise of Donald Trump, who has helped to valorize what we describe as a more ethno-nationalist kind of Christian. So it's not just Christian nationalism, but white Christian nationalism is the combination there. The women's rights movement was, again, fiercely resisted by the Christian right, which positioned itself in opposition to most aspects of the women's movement. And today, the descendant patriarchalism is with us. Some denominations that have accepted women leaders have decided to withdraw their support. The idea that equality and interchangeable like roles or people's gifts determining where they would serve has been rolled back in some circles in favor of a kind of either hard or soft patriarchalism, with the explicit teaching repeatedly undertaken that men are to lead and women are to submit. As for abortion, probably the central official goal of the Christian right was the overturning of Roe. This was finally accomplished in 2022 with justices appointed by Donald Trump, a decisive factor, as you know. I would argue that the failure of earlier Republican presidents to achieve the overturning of Roe versus Wade, despite promising to do so, helped to sour Christian support for them and to radicalize the Christian right population in the U.S. It also meant that when Donald Trump's appointees were able to achieve this helped to cement the loyalty of significant millions of Americans for President Trump. As for the sexual revolution, the Christian right opposed the sexual revolution from its beginning, teaching that by God's will, sex belongs only in heterosexual marriage. Opposition to divorce on the Christian right has weakened. Opposition to gay rights had weakened, but is now strengthening again. You can see it in the polling. And the anti-transgender cause is the cause of the day of the ferocious mobilization of the Christian right. The attack on poverty and economic injustice was generally met with either indifference or hostility from the Christian right. They generally aligned themselves with the conservative, low tax, low regulation, small government ethos of the old GOP, and did not offer strong support for social safety net spending. As for the Vietnam War and nuclear Armageddon, the Christian right is generally pro-Vietnam War, out of patriotism, kind of a Christian-laced patriotism. As for Armageddon and nuclear weapons, my experience when I was involved in this issue is that the Christian right often escaped the fantasies of the end of times or worked Armageddon scenarios into their theology such that even if nuclear war came, it would be by God's will to bring about the end of time. And finally, as for environmental distress, there was a period where Christian conservatives were open to what the scientists were saying about the environment. But I would say by the early 2000s, when President George W. Bush was not able to corral conservative support for like a cap and trade scheme related to climate change, the Christian right recently, for various reasons, turned against environmental concern, identified it as a liberal or woke or pagan cause, and has dismissed climate change as a liberal hoax. Third movement of the talk. For 60 years, or 70, these competing visions, polar opposites of each other, have been battling it out in religious communities and in the public square. I've spent my 30-plus year career in the middle of many of these fights. I can tell you it has been challenging. It has been exhausting. but it has until recently occurred within the recognizable boundaries of religious community and democratic liberation. What I mean is, the change is happening. While it wasn't fun to have these arguments all the time, and how many of you, have been in religious communities where some of these issues were debated? Not comfortable, right? We knew what the rules were back then. We knew how the game was played. What we did was you had debates in churches, and maybe you took a vote, or maybe a leadership body made a decision and you either liked it or you didn't. Or maybe you had debates in Congress and positions were fairly stated and arguments were made and votes were taken and someone won and someone lost and the side that lost regretted to find another day. The democratic process. Let's just take a moment and say that you have a bit of debate on you and you have been in the arguments and you have fought the good fight for something like a religious left liberal vision. Congratulations, thanks. We're on the same team. Feel proud of the side that I think does have the moral high ground. Of course, not everybody agrees, but I agree. A lot of you agree, so we must be right? So, the era that I'm describing as having passed, let's call it polarization within liberalism. What I mean is, within the boundaries of classic liberal moral and political theory, and within the context of the long-standing institutions that embody those theories, like church decision-making structures and holidays, and local, state, and federal governments, and the legislative process, and elections, and so on, rule of law. Those institutions sometimes were very frustrating. Debates seem to last forever. Sometimes our side even lost. Often our side lost. But most of the time, these institutions worked, and most everybody agreed to play by the agreed rules. But, fourth movement. Today we're witnessing the rise of what is variously called post-liberalism or illiberalism. Let's define illiberalism as the main term I use as a political movement that undermines liberal democratic principles. It engages in the hollowing out of liberal democracy from within. People tend to turn to illiberalism when they feel that liberal democracy hasn't protected their identity, their security, their prosperity, or their future. And when ambitious leaders, usually populists, seize that mood of discontent to win power, and then, if they choose to consolidate power ruthlessly outside the rule structure of democratic government, then you have liberalism heading towards authoritarianism and possibly the loss of democracy. Friends, I believe that this is now, that this is where we are. But we are so polarized, we can't even agree on who is responsible for the liberal turn that is threatening our social cohesion, peace, and democracy. I'll tell you the story that I've been telling that Sid heard me give in Athens. My story is that the fundamental problem is what some people call Christian nationalism and what I call authoritarian reactionary Christianity. It's Christianity that is people identify as Christians and they believe that their faith is what inspires them. It's reactionary, and it's reacting negatively to all these changes like the ones I just named. And it has now fallen for authoritarianism. Christian nationalism, I think, doesn't communicate that idea as clearly as what I call ARC. Memorize it, share it with your friends. Don't put it on Facebook or something that will be mad at you, okay? Authoritarian, reactionary Christianity. The thing is, what had been an idea and had been brewing for a while is now in power at the federal level and in many states. The United States President today, whose base of support rests principally on Christian right folks, has begun executing elements of an illiberal playbook. He has been centralizing vast powers of the presidency, weakening checks and balances, inflaming cultural grievances and divisions, threatening to erode individual rights and freedoms, and essentially attempting to roll back not just all the legislative and cultural changes that I described as part of the agenda of religious nationalism, but also, and I did not anticipate this, attempting to weaken or destroy those outposts of culture which still hold to progressive values. So it isn't enough just to reverse every legislative change that was progressive since 1960. The broader agenda is to weaken or destroy civil society, educational, nonprofit, cultural, media, entertainment, business, and other outposts that have been significant purveyors of such values. As of now, fall 2025, as I speak to you tonight, I believe that illiberal authoritarian consolidation of power in the United States is a much more significant issue than the old left versus right arguments about policies and values. This is about whether we will have democratic culture in a democratic government. It's about whether we will have a culture of free expression. It's about whether I need to be scared to talk to you honestly. I gave a version of the speech in Germany about 2 weeks ago, and they were worried about it. They were worried about us. Fifth movement, but they say it's left liberalism that is the problem. So let's listen to what they say. Our first speaker, Joyce, gave some Buddhist quotes related to dialogue. So let's listen to what the other side is saying. In a column 2 days ago in the New York Times, conservative columnist Ross Douthat makes the best case I have seen for the argument that left liberalism is at least an equivalent problem to right liberalism. This is what he says. To understand general developments in Western politics as the norms of post-Cold War liberalism break down and post-liberal tendencies take hold, that's his goal. These tendencies, he says, exist within both progressivism and right-wing populism. He names the impulse to police and censor speech, the increasing potency of identitarian appeals, the impatience with claims to neutrality and procedural fairness, the urge to reduce all politics to existential conflict. Douthat goes on to say, but this illiberalism takes substantially different forms on the left versus the right, and those differences help explain why people on either side of the divide struggle so mightily to understand their opponents and see today's dangers through their eyes. We have to try to understand, so listen on. He says, the divide starts with a crucial asymmetry. In both the United States and Europe, the political right has plenty of popular support, but considerably less influence inside the managerial systems through which elected officials actually exercise their power. By contrast, progressivism often starts with a weaker base of popular support, but its core believers enjoy an extraordinary advantage in the meritocratic institutions, private as well as public, that actually staff and shape the power structure. He's talking about civil service, education, the administrative bureaucracy of the courts, the nonprofit sector, the law firms, and so on. Which, by the way, is why all of those are being targeted. Me, not them. Then he says, given this asymmetry, in an environment of increasing polarization where liberal norms are losing purchase, you would expect each side to embrace post-liberalism that plays to its distinctive strengths. That's exactly what has happened. Progressivism in the last 10 years, he says, has pursued increasingly radical measures through complex, indirect, and bureaucratic means, using state power subtly to reshape private institutions and creating systems that feel repressive without necessarily having an identifiable repressor in chief. This is McCarthyism without McCarthy. Left McCarthy. His examples, he He says, activists and elites effect dramatic change outside the democratic process and then try to survive or sidestep backlash from the voters. It's a drama where sudden changes seem to just happen. Unprecedented waves of immigration and disintegration on both continents, a radical shift in traditional American norms around race or sex, those two right there. A new regime of euthanasia in Canada is announced, without having a singular progressive leader who claims responsibility and provides the policy with charismatic fits. So from Dowd's perspective, this is reporting from the right, he says, right-wing populism now in power is attempting to respond to left-wing liberalism that has been in power in more subtle ways. So, what it amounts to, this is me not talking. The claim of the right is that the left started it. We started the illiberalism by forcing our liberal values on the throats of people who do. And they say, what the right is doing is just pushing back, now using the power of the state, because that's the power that they have. A lot of them will say that this restarting movement began as early as the 1960s, like when we supported all these changes and a lot of them were mandated by law. But they would also say it had been accelerating during what they often call peak woke America, which lasted from about the mid-2010s until the end of the Biden administration. 6 point, one paragraph. Whoever is to blame, we are now in a mutual finger-pointing death spiral. The two sides of this polarity are in a vicious circle in both culture and politics. We are mirroring each other in our mutual antipathy. When I was raised, I had a loving family. I was the oldest, and then I had 3 sisters behind me. My middle sister died of cancer about 7 years ago, and it drew the whole family together. But that ended during the first Trump presidency, and this intensified during this one, in which my 2 surviving sisters cannot talk to each other because of their politics. They cannot talk to each other. One of my sisters said to me recently, I will never talk to my other sister until she apologizes for voting for who she did and takes full responsibility for everything that goes into it. How do you think that's going to work out? We are at a place of juvenile levels of finger pointing, mutual blaming, mutual incomprehension, mutual loathing. Is that too strong a word? I don't think so. Entirely different epistemologies and media feeds. In other words, we're not experiencing the same reality because we are looking at different feeds with algorithms that intensify our mutual incomprehension of each other. We are witnessing deepening social divisions with increasing threats and use of violence in the typical juvenile way. We notice when they do the violence, not on our side of the violence and vice versa, right? This is pathological. This is really more the work of psychologists than political scientists at this point. This is mutual assured destruction. So, seventh, what do we do? I've got it all figured out. Here's my conclusion. First, I would say it is right to continue to make a principled case for your values, whatever they are, and to set a great example of living them. And I would say to religious believers in the audience, go where the wells are deepest within your religious tradition. Consult your own scriptures, your own spiritual leaders. Don't make arguments that could be made secularly if you have a religious basis. Root deeply in the wellsprings of an ancient faith, or 2 or 3. For preachers, I often say, if you're in a religiously divided congregation, your people might listen to you with your moral statements, especially ones that sound political, only if you sound like this is unimpeachable truth from your religious tradition. It can't just sound like a political talk. You might still be doomed, but at least you've got a good try, right? And I'm not joking. I know ministers who've lost their jobs because they preach Sermon on the Mount. This is real. But still, we must give it our best effort. So, first, continue to make a principled case for your values. Root those values deeply in religion and set a great example of worthy renown. There may be a time when words don't matter nearly as much as deeds. Maybe words never matter nearly as much as deeds. Secondly, act according to democratic principles enshrined in our Constitution. We might want to get out and read the Constitution like every day, right now. Things like freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, disestablishment of religion. Act to protect both the church and state, both threatened individuals and threatened institutions of culture from authoritarian takeover, silencing, or destruction. I'm teaching a class on James Baldwin. In fact, I brought my Baldwin notebook for tonight. I just taught a class here in the wedding room, the bride's room. You think, what else would I be doing? In the bride's room, teaching a class back on James Baldwin. Like, what else? Right? So I'm doing that, and I'm remembering something that James Baldwin said in his speech. He said, as far as I've heard, we still live in a democratic country until proven otherwise. Express democratic values. Speak freely, do not be intimidated. Stand up for those who are most at risk. Be an American. Finally, I would say, check for any liberal tendencies that may be creeping in on you, your heart, your side, your team. Watch out for demonizing the other side. Watch out for demonizing language. Try to retain relationships across the divide wherever possible and wherever safe. It's not always safe, but where it's possible. Respect the free expression of ideas you don't agree with. Practice civil discourse and give good reasons for your arguments. Respect democratic norms like honoring the results of elections and rejecting any form of political violence or threats of violence. Acknowledge that we are a divided, diverse society. The other 40 to 45% of America isn't going away. That we're going to have to learn to bear with each other. To bear with each other. When I wrote those words, I thought, oh, there's a scripture or two that says something about that. So I'm not close with it. Colossians 3:12. This may not be your tradition, but listen to the virtues that are lifted up here. So, as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another, and forgiving each other whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. Beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. What this text says to me in light of the whole story that I just told you is that the greatest need of this present moment, which is becoming a national emergency, I suppose, is not to produce more fiery culture warriors, but instead Christians and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and secular folks and others who are relearning how to practice gentleness and bearing with one another and forgiveness and even love. If we can be this, if we can find people on the other side who are also trying to be this because they also see the danger, and there are some, maybe our country can avoid doing this. Let us hope and pray that this is so, and let us do our part.
This is a home conference for our next presenter. All Augusta native, all parents, professional football signs, and all university, where he had served since 2008, and prior to that, he was on the political science faculty at Augusta University for 10 years, 1998 to 2008. His teaching and research focus on American immigration policy, German politics, and state and local government. A Fulbright scholar, Harris has held academic appointments in Germany and the U.S., including as research associate at the University of California, San Diego Center for Comparative Immigration Studies. Dr. Harris holds a BA from Excelsior College, an MBA from Georgia Southern University, and his PhD is from Auburn University. He is the co-author of Building a Diaspora of Russian Jews in Israel, Germany, and the USA, and has published widely on immigration, diaspora politics, and public administration. His scholarship has been recognized by the American Society for Public Administration, and his outreach and service connects academic research with community engagement. Fluent in German, Harris has led student exchange programs, published extensively in both English and German, and been a frequent commentator in international, national, and regional media on U.S. and European politics. I want to throw in that back in the day, he was a pretty mean, bruising rugby player as well. Let us welcome Dr. Paul Harris.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to do my best so you can hear everything, although I lecture to very large sections of students, and this is actually a small section, and I don't use a microphone, but I'm going to use a microphone tonight. So thank you for the invitation to speak with you this evening. It is good to be back home. I also want to acknowledge my good friend, Dr. Sid Gates, the program organizer, and someone I worked with closely over 2 decades ago when I was on the faculty at Augusta State. I'm deeply grateful to Sid not only for tonight's invitation, but for his many years of friendship and his unwavering commitment to social justice, constructing bridges across political, social, and religious divides, and to build a community here in Augusta. His commitment to these ideals reminds me why these conversations matter. So thank you very much. I would also like to just give a short mention to a dear friend of mine who could not be here, Dr. Andy Reese. Dr. Reese and I worked very, very closely together along with Dr. Gates in the past 20 or so years. Dr. Reese is going through a very difficult time with his cancer, but I hope he's here with us on streaming, and he certainly is here in our thoughts and in mind. Well, it's a privilege to return here and to reflect with you on questions that have shaped both my scholarship and our national conversation. With that in mind, let me situate myself in this discussion. As someone who has spent much of my career studying immigration and national identity, I approach this subject not only as a scholar, but as someone concerned about how these questions affect real communities and shape our shared future. As we all know, the United States has a strong history of immigration and immigrant assimilation, and we can indeed be proud of that. It is something worth celebrating. The ways immigrants have enriched and strengthened the fabric of American life. This sentiment is most clearly expressed by the poet Emma Lazarus, who famously wrote in 1883 words later inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This vision of America as a welcoming nation is one we rightly celebrate, even as we acknowledge the historical challenges and exclusions alongside it. For instance, Isaac Meyer Wiles was born Isaac Meyer Weitz in 1819 in Steinbrück, which is now part of the Czech Republic. A German-speaking Jewish immigrant from Bohemia, Wiles arrived in the mid-19th century when anti-Jewish prejudice was widespread. Yet he became a pioneering leader, founding Hebrew Union College and shaping Reform Judaism in America. Similarly, Mother Greene, an Italian Catholic nun, came to the U.S. in 1889. At a time of deep suspicion toward Catholics and toward women in leadership. She nevertheless built hospitals, schools, and orphanages that transformed immigrant communities. She was eventually recognized as the first U.S. citizen to be canonized and declared a saint. Stories like these remind us that even in times of exclusion and discrimination, immigrants helped redefine what it meant to be American. As John Kennedy wrote in his 1958 book, A Nation of Immigrants, quote, "Immigration policy should be generous, it should be fair, it should be flexible. With such a policy, we can turn to the world and to our own past with clean hands and a clear conscience," end quote. And I'd like to take that as our starting point and explore how the U.S. has historically defined and counts as American, and how Christian nationalism today carries forward that tradition in a new way. So the question, what does it mean to be American, has never had a single fixed answer. Throughout U.S. history, immigration policy has defined and redefined that entity. For example, in colonial America, religion often marked the line between insiders and outsiders. In many colonies, political rights were restricted to Protestants, and Catholics were barred from public office. Jewish communities present in North America since the 1600s faced prejudice and were denied equal civil and political rights in some states until the mid-19th century. The Maryland colony is a striking case. Founded as a Catholic refuge, it initially offered broader toleration. At times, however, Catholics in power limited Protestant rights. Later, Protestants gained control and imposed anti-Catholic restrictions, barring Catholics from voting and holding office. This back and forth shows that the exclusion was not only directed at one group, but part of a broader contest over which faiths belong. Then as we move through the 19th century, Irish and Italian Catholic immigrants arrived in large numbers, and they were met with suspicion, fueling the rise of the Know-Nothing movement in the 1850s, which warned that Catholics owed allegiance to the Pope and could not be trusted as Americans. By the end of the 19th century, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first major federal law to bar immigration based on nationality, which reflected fears that Chinese immigrants threatened American jobs and cultural identity. Following the end of the First World War, the national origins quota system reduced immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, where millions of Catholics and Jews lived, and it privileged Northern and Western Europeans and was locally designed to preserve a Protestant Anglo-Saxon vision of America. Another chapter in the story unfolded during the mid-20th century with the Bracero program. Beginning in 1942, the U.S. brought in hundreds of thousands of Mexican laborers under temporary contracts to fill wartime labor shortages, especially in agriculture. While the program offered economic opportunities, it also left many workers vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, since they had few rights and little protection. By the 1950s, the program had become deeply controversial. On the one hand, growers relied heavily on Bracero labor. On the other hand, critics argued that it depressed wages and encouraged unauthorized immigration. In 1954, the Eisenhower administration responded with what was officially called Operation Wetback, a mass deportation campaign that included arrests, raids, and forced removals of Mexican migrants, including some who were legally present. The episode underscored the contradictions in U.S. immigration policy, welcoming immigrant labor when convenient, but casting immigrants as threats when political winds shifted. It wasn't until the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which Dr. Gushee mentioned, which coincides with the Civil Rights Movement, which dismantled the quota system, opening immigration to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It marked a move toward redefining American more in civic than ethnic or religious terms. So from the colonial period through the 20th century, immigration law has always been more than numbers. It has been a reflection of what kind of people were imagined to count as Americans. But, as Dr. Gushee has noted in his comments, Christian nationalism or Christian authoritarianism extends these older exclusionary traditions by adding a distinctly religious dimension. It imagines America's true identity not just as cultural or ethnic, but as Christian. Immigration in this view should be managed to preserve that identity. Christian nationalist discord continues that story, offering a vision in which being truly American means being Christian, and immigration is acceptable only when it affirms that identity. In this framework, immigrants are welcome if they appear willing to assimilate into a culturally Christian America, but resisted if they represent pluralism, difference, or challenges to that imagined national character. Sociologist Andrew Whitehead, Stroop, and Baker found in a 2021 study that Americans who strongly embrace Christian nationalism are far more likely to support restrictive immigration policies and less likely to adopt policies that reflect pluralism and inclusivity. In other words, nationalism just doesn't shape who counts as us. It also defines who counts as a legitimate them and whether they should be allowed in at all. Many churches and Christian leaders argue that welcoming immigrants is a moral obligation, citing biblical commands to welcome the stranger. Christianity, in other words, can inspire both inclusive and exclusive visions of the nation. So the presence of Christian nationalism in immigration debates raises several important questions. The first, pluralism. The United States is committed, or at least in principle, to religious freedom and equality. Can immigration policy reflect those commitments if it privileges one religion in defining national identity? Second, social cohesion. Casting immigrants as a threat to a Christian America shapes not just laws, but also public attitudes. It can deepen polarization, marginalize communities, and make it harder for newcomers to integrate. Third, the internal debate. Within Christianity itself, there is tension. Some argue that protecting America's Christian identity requires restrictive policies. Others insist that Christian faith calls for hospitality, compassion, and solidarity with migrants. These debates echo older struggles in the U.S. about who counts as American, but now with a sharper religious edge. From the colonial restrictions on Catholics and Jews to the Chinese Exclusion Act to the quotas of the 1920s and to the reforms of 1965, immigration law has always reflected competing visions of American identity. Christian nationalism continues that story, offering a vision in which being truly American means being Christian, and immigration is acceptable only insofar as it reinforces that religious identity. The ice waves that we witness today also call to mind another chapter of American history, the Jim Crow South. The contexts are not identical, but the parallels are In both cases, law enforcement power was used to keep entire communities living in fear. And both suspicion was racial, whether it's African Americans in the South or Latino immigrants today. And in both, people found their daily lives disrupted, their mobility restricted, and their dignity diminished. The lesson is clear. When the state uses fear to control communities, it undermines the very principles of equality and justice on which our nation stands. But if we are to live up to our highest ideals, if we are to truly embody the words of Emma Lazarus, John Kennedy, William Baldwin, and the best of our democratic traditions, then we must resist narrowing the definition of who belongs. Now, to be certain, the United States, like any nation, must have laws, and we should respect them. But when enforcement becomes inhumane, when dignity is denied, we are called to seek a better way, one that reflects the pluralism and compassion at the heart of a truly free society. Nearly 4 centuries ago, John Greene, the Puritan governor of the Massachusetts Bay colony, delivered a sermon aboard the Arbella in 1630 titled A Model of Christian Charity. In it, he told his fellow settlers that their new community must be as a city upon a hill, watched by the world. Winthrop's words were both an aspiration and a warning. He urged his community to live faithfully and justly, because if they failed, their failures too would be visible to all. The city upon a hill was not just a symbol of pride, but also a call to moral responsibility before the world. In our own time, that means renewing our commitment to be a nation that welcomes, that integrates, and that allows diversity to strengthen rather than divide us. The question before us is not just who gets in, but what kind of nation we choose to be. My hope is that we can commit ourselves again to becoming that shining city on the hill, a nation where pluralism is not a threat, but a promise fulfilled. Thank you very much.
We have bandied the term Christian a lot tonight. I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister. There are over 39,000 Christian denominations in the world, several hundred in this country alone. So when we say Christian, it's a pluralistic kind of concept, even though we are talking about one religion. We have one last presenter tonight who is no stranger to many of us. He is a native of Wisconsin, and he grew up with a camera in his hand, it would appear. His family attests to that as well. Art Albert. He holds a degree in printing and publishing and built his expertise in the printing industry, specializing in color separation. Since 1999, Albertson has dedicated his career to creating documentary films and focus on preserving the history and culture of Southern communities. His work has been featured on PBS and screened at film festivals across the U.S. Notable titles include Displaced, The Unexpected Fallout from the Cold War, Discovering Day, Spirit Captured in Clay, and What Cost, Pipelines, Pollution, and Eminent Domain in the Rural South in 2022. Alberts was conferred the Humanitarian Award at the Beaufort International Film Festival for his documentary, Sacred Waters of the Humanopian Peril. He returned his roots in film photography by founding Albertson Film Photography in 2016 and opening a community art room. He used this space to teach black and white film photography, create silver and gelatin prints, and inspire a new generation of film photographers. His own photography reached a milestone with the release of his first book, regions of Georgia and South Carolina. His second book, The Sacred Waters of Okie, released in 2025, continues his journey. Photographs in this series were taken with vintage cameras, emphasizing Alberton's meticulous attention to detail and respect for traditional techniques. Through his films, books, and photography, Mark Alberton continues to celebrate the history and beauty of the South while preserving its stories for future generations. Mark Alberton.
Thank you all. I'm going to put on my glasses because I can't see. I'm trying without glasses, but I have to have glasses. When I was a child, I hated driving a school bus. It was just like the movie Forrest Gump. I'd walk down the aisle, kids would intentionally move over to the edge of the seat, giving me no room to sit. This seat taken. Just like the movie Forrest Gump. There was no Jenny, though. Finally, at the back of the bus, I'd push onto the last seat of the last row. I'd usually give about an eighth of the seat to rest one butt up on. The 20-minute ride was very uncomfortable. But isn't this how we treat the environment? It is the very last of all of our concerns. After all, there's health care, there's employment, Social Security, and so many pressing issues our society faces instead of the environment. When I watched the debate between President Trump and Harris in 2024, just like the bus trip, the environment had to take the very last seat. The last few minutes of the debate. And even then, both candidates ended up arguing about how many jobs they create instead of what we were doing to the planet. When Sid asked me to speak here today, I thought that my experience in Christianity really would not make me a good candidate. Because I really don't know a lot about Christianity and religion in general. Yet ask me about spirituality, and I can give you many examples of that in my lifetime in the wilderness. No, I didn't hear a voice or see a sign. What I've experienced many times is something that you cannot retrieve with the five senses. You take it away from inside. And each time I go deep into wild places, I come away with a sense that without these places, you're doomed. Unfortunately, many feel they are not necessary, or that wild spaces have no value unless they are developed. Others envision our planet as a disposable diaper to be thrown away after use. After all, it's Mars, isn't there? In research I've conducted, there is definitely a connection with Christian nationalism followers who deny science and humankind's effect on the Earth. While fires go out of control, megastorms hammer the coastline, and record droughts arch the landscape, they believe that it is all part of the master plan. That God will come one day, soon, with the rapture, and whisk them away while the earth undergoes a complete demolition. About a third of evangelical Protestants say the earth is getting warmer, mostly due to human activity. That's about 32%. While similar shares say the earth is getting warmer, mostly due to natural patterns. It's about 36%. Or they are unsure or not convinced that the earth is getting warmer. It's about 32%. So that means about 32% say there's a problem, while 68% don't. There's a strong view that God is in control of the climate, and no matter what happens, it's out of our hands. And if you're a true Christian, everything will be okay. Yet even if you don't believe the science, all you have to do is look on your computer, log on to Google, and watch Google time-lapse flash satellite history before your eyes from 1984 to 2022. Within these images, you can watch the glaciers recede and deforestation take place in the jungles of Africa. You can see once wild areas where trees and vegetation become blacktop parking lots, or coastal shorelines rapidly shrinking and disappearing as the oceans rise. Many will say this is all part of a change, and that change is climate, and climate has been occurring since the beginning of time. True. Yet never has environmental change happened so rapidly. Since the 1800s, when the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas began, the metamorphosis had been happening with greenhouse gases. There is the smoking gun, and it's from us. The average temperature of the Earth's surface is about 2.32 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it was in the late 1800s, and warmer than at any time in the last 100,000 years. The last decade, 2011 to 2020, was the warmest on record, and each of the last 4 decades has been warmer than any previous decade since 1850. What exactly do we not understand or care to see? What about our leaders? And God created heaven and earth. Within Christian biblical context, dominion means sovereign authority, rule, or power over creation as given to humanity by God to steward and manage the earth and its inhabitants. This authority requires responsibility, requires loving and caring leadership rather than exploitation or abuse. With humans acting as caretakers and accountable for the well-being of creation. I do not see anywhere in the Bible where it states that humankind has the right to waste, overuse, or destroy God's creation. We are to coexist. This is not domination. Doesn't it make sense then for us to treat Earth as a gift? As a place where we can breathe clean air, drink clean water, and grow healthy food in soil that is pure from chemicals and toxins. It seems to me that those who truly love their children and descendants should love their planet equally as much. For if we destroy them, the children will have nothing but pain and suffering. I believe that we can make this world a heaven or a hell. If we preserve, protect, and coexist on this planet, it will be a heaven. If we destroy, exploit, and abuse the planet, it will become our hell. A hell that will have to be endured for generations to come after all of us are gone. Even though we have made amazing advances in technology and science, if our world is full of toxins, what good will it be will these advancements be? How will a child coming into this world have a chance when the breast milk it drinks is full of microplastics? Climate change and the man-made pollutants in the environment are increasing. I'm quoting from the National Library of Medicine. Over 70% of infectious diseases are caused by the environment we live in. Moreover, than half of human pathogenic diseases are a result of climate change. It's like we don't understand the other living things on this planet. They communicate, but we can't communicate with them. So we consider them to be lesser than us. Yet it is within the wild spaces that we can find answers. In the Christian faith, didn't Jesus go into the wilderness to hear God? Why didn't he just go to a temple or a quiet spot to sit? What about Moses in the burning bush? Didn't he witness this miracle in the desolate and wild place of Mount Horeb? I've watched city kids experience nature in the wild for the first time. I've heard their life-changing stories and positive impact. Something was given to their soul, something that cannot be received from material and human-created possessions. They learned rapidly that the wilderness was not to be feared. It was exciting, refreshing, original, and beautiful. They came away with gifts that had no monetary value. Gifts that only the wilderness can give because the wilderness is part of us. In nature, we can find spiritual connection. There are no distractions. There's no noise from music or loud cars. The drone of humankind is non-existent or very faint. And to me, it means the perfect opportunity to absorb messages not heard through our ears or understood by our brain, but fully comprehended by our souls. According to a Pew Research poll, most Americans expect negative consequences from climate change and environmental regulations within the next 30 years. And most evangelical Protestants think the U.S. will overreact to climate change by creating unnecessary environmental regulations. This belief has been going on for some time and has been exacerbated to a much higher degree with the Trump administration, as important protective regulations are weakened or dismantled, and a commitment to the fossil fuel industry has been put in force. The very science of greenhouse gases from fossil fuels is being discounted or ignored. I I fear that the extreme weather events, once rare and only under unusual circumstances, will become commonplace. So much so that it will be just another day as the world rapidly fades away. Eden will become hell, and we are allowing it to happen. With all of the natural disasters occurring, one would think that the rapture of the Christian nationalists and evangelical Protestants are waiting for has already arrived. Except, I hate to break it to them, they're still here. We're still here. There is no other place for us to live, and this gift, this wonderful place, is rapidly being destroyed. The bottom line is, when we leave this place, our home, our only moral home, a better place or a worse place after we're gone, what will leave those who come after us? How do we fix this? Everything we do today will affect tomorrow. Living strictly for today means we're leaving nothing for those who come after us. There are things we can do to change what is happening. First, we need leadership who sees environmental challenges ahead as a priority. This is at the local, state, and national levels. We need leaders who understand that healthy economy depends on a healthy population. Workers cannot do their jobs if they're sick of lead, microplastics, and other toxins. Second, we need environmental study at every learning institution from kindergarten to higher education. Children need to learn that there is more to living than just succeeding in business. If our planet is destroyed in the process, if our water, air, and soil are ruined by toxins, no matter the wealth involved, the future will be bleak. And thirdly, each of us, everything we do has consequences and affects the next generation. Plant a tree. Stop spraying your yard with poisons. Use motion sensor outdoor lights instead of keeping them on all night. Reuse your grocery bags and cut back on plastics. Invest in businesses that promote recycling and sustainable practices. Uninvest in those who do not. In our society, a capitalist society, marching in the streets in protest may make you feel better. It does me. But it really isn't moving the needle, at least not this administration. The best way to make change is to impact by your spending or not spending. We control by our masses and how we spend. If we buy more plastic, industry will produce it. If we buy sustainable products, industry will change. In conclusion, I'm asking you to listen to the closest voice from God there is within the earth. Not from a politician, not from that multimillionaire, not from the raving lunatic who has no basis for his or her claims. Just look around. Look at the earth. Listen to the earth. Think about the children who are here and yet to come. Think about more than yourself, and think about tomorrow. We are born from the earth and die into the earth. For dust you are, to dust you shall return. Thank you very much.
Folks, we are going to have a panel discussion. I can rest on this microphone here. That will not be small. Questions to be heard, and I think we've got our cards here. Yes, for the statement. While I am going through these like a riverboat gambler, one of the questions I have heard several of you pose is the concern of the Johnson Amendment. That's kind of esoteric stuff. You just don't know what that is. But that's U.S. tax code that prevents churches and other nonprofits from being politically engaged. Our Congressman from the 12th, Greg Allen, and President Trump have been forces to repeal that. It has not been repealed, but it was leaned on significantly in July. So my question is to the panel, are we concerned about this quasi-repeal ramifications of the Johnson Amendment where nonprofits, including churches, can actually, in theory, maybe more than theory, become political action committees? And you all will pass the, not everyone has to answer.
it's bad for both church and state to roll back
Maybe just pass the microphone that you've got in your hand. Yeah, there you
go. It is bad for both church and state to undo the Johnson Amendment. The interesting thing about it is that in the end, I think it would do more damage to churches. I think we're already seeing a weakening of the religious sector in some ways in America and the politicizing of everything. I think that certainly the average local church pastor, and I am a pastor at heart by calling originally, that wants to do everything possible to protect the identity of their religious community, not have it become merely a political action committee or a stop on politicians speaking towards them. So I would say if the Johnson Amendment is weakened or overturned, it might become tempting for every socially engaged church to start endorsing candidates and running that kind of operation. I strongly warn against it, both for the health of society and for the health of the church.
Dr. Harris, do you have a need to comment on that? Okay. Religious authoritarianism is prevalent in other nations around the world. In some nations, there is the controlling theocracy reality versus democracy form of governance we have in the U.S. Lessons we should heed from other nations related to our discussion tonight.
Yeah, I think let's go around here. Here we go. Three professors on the stage, on the floor. Got this? Okay, great. Super. So that's a very good question. This is what I'll ask you. You don't have an answer. But this is what I asked my students just last week. I said, does anyone in this class, now we're talking about the state, we're not talking about the people, does anyone in this class, would any of you like to go visit Afghanistan? Would you like to go visit Iran? Would you like to go even visit Turkey, for example? Right there, and this is the problem here, that you have, we talk about Christian nationalism here, right? But if we're taking a look at the global tradition right here, you see how repressive these regimes can be, right? And these are dangerous things. Look, in our own faith tradition, in our own history, there was a thing called the 30-Year War. There was a thing called good old-fashioned Christian anti-Semitism, things like that. But what we're talking about globally, right? And that's of course makes things all the more because typically countries are looking to the United States for leadership, and then if you see the United States backsliding, then of course people are going to feel empowered right here. And I think that's really a big challenge, and not to mention just the rise of nationalism and populism throughout Europe as well. So.
There is a rise of various kinds of religious, nationalist, authoritarianism, often with a reactionary bent. It's Eastern Orthodox, it's Catholic, it's sometimes Protestant, it's sometimes Jewish, sometimes Muslim, sometimes Hindu, sometimes Buddhist. So it is not confined to Christianity, but it's where a government or leaders find it to be convenient to wrap themselves in the historical majority religion of the people, and to say, vote for me and I will restore your preeminence. Vote for me and I will make sure your values are the law of the land. You will not have to tolerate people who look at it differently. And once that gets going, it has a kind of an inexorable logic of radicalization, because you can always be more extreme, more narrow, more repressive in enforcing that vision. We have very strong constitutional limits on the establishment of religion in the United States. It's in the First Amendment. But such limits are only as strong as, you might say, the will of the people and whether the judiciary respects them if it comes to a judicial decision. And we've seen a lot of erosion there, I think, as well.
Our religions in this country, especially Christianity, meet the warning signs of planet destruction with greater concern and response.
Well, honestly, I think that there are some religions and some are practicing putting the word out there, but I think the majority, unfortunately, not. I think that it is something that the majority of our population feel like it's an issue. It's there. We need to address it. But it's like I said before, it's way behind everything else. There seems to be so many more pressing issues in our world that are right in front of us. And the environment seems like it's always going to be there. We always feel like it's going to be there for us. It's always going to be there. We hear fires, and we all survive. We had a hurricane last year. We survived. A lot of people didn't. But the sad thing about it is I think that we're missing the point. We're missing the big picture. That's my opinion.
Unfortunately, voicing concerns of the negative effects of Christian nationalism comes off in media as Christian bashing. How can the concerns be addressed without sounding anti-Christian?
I think that's real easy. We have to say that what we're talking about is a political movement. Let's say you're a Christian. We'll start there. You're a Christian who does not support Christian nationalism or authoritarian reaction to Christianity. You say, precisely as a Christian, I read the resources and the scriptures and traditions of my faith in a very different way. So it's competing accounts of what Christianity is about. Here's my account, and here's what it's grounded in. So we're in an internal argument within the Christian community that also does have societal ramifications. All over the country who are mainly progressive Christians, but not exclusively. There's millions and millions and millions of Christians who are progressive and immoral commitments along the lines of what I spoke about this evening. But sometimes I think they've become hesitant to speak the deep language of faith, partly because that language has been co-opted by the right. They don't want to be like, oh, you're one of those Bible thumpers or something, right? So they don't want to sound like that. So they don't want to quote the Bible. They don't want to talk about Jesus or something. I want to say we cannot concede that ground. We need to speak the language of faith, you might say, competitively. By the way, the same thing is happening in Israel, just as an example. There's a certain kind of ultra-religious nationalism in Israel that is helping to generate its policies right now. But there's lots and lots of other Jewish citizens of Israel who are articulating a different Jewish vision. And they're arguing about it. That's true in Turkey. It's true in a lot of places. So we need to feel free, in fact we are really obligated to compete on the ground of shared faith. If you're not a Christian, it's a little bit more difficult. Then it's a different kind of conversation. We talk more about civic values and so on. But in many ways, this is an internal argument among Christians, and we need to do better.
Here's a hypothetical question, but I think a very good one. Any guess how our nation's founders will react to current separate dynamics?
Let's ask our political scientists what do you think?
Well, so we have to understand that our founders, the framers, they were metaphors. They were enlightened. They were men who had many faults, right? Native Americans did not belong. So I talked about immigration. Let's talk about who belongs, who doesn't. So let's go back to 1789, 1790, the Constitution with the Bill of Rights, ratified. Well, who belongs? Who has franchise? White males with property. That's it, right? Native Americans. Americans, they're excluded. African Americans certainly are excluded, right? And the history of the United States has always been about navigating who comes in, who belongs, and so forth. And it's something that the framers of our Constitution understood, because our framers of our Constitution, they were reading John Locke, and they understood, Emmanuel Kant's perpetual peace. They understood that they had to find a way to get away from know that they were not perfect. And then the whole debate on the Constitution had to, of course, if you had to make that Faustian bargain, that deal with the devil when it came to the issue of slavery, because you're not going to get Georgia to come in, or Virginia to come in, or the Carolinas to come in, right there. So I would think that today, if the framers were around, I think that they would be pretty appalled at what they saw. They certainly couldn't imagine what government would look like today. They also talked about, and this is very, very important, they also talked about virtue. And this is something that David Gushing talked about. You don't be afraid of claiming virtue. Don't be afraid of saying there's a right and there's a wrong. And the thing is that if you're not a virtuous person, right, and they believe it, right, if you're not a virtuous person, there is no amount of politics that you're going to be good. You're not going to be right. And our nation is replete with that when we have people with virtue in it. And then we're certainly replete when we have people without virtue. We see what happens right there. So, do you want to?
When we have people without virtue, I'm also arguing my democracy vote. People who don't have a constitutionalism commitment or a covenantal commitment, that is the idea that the Constitution is a covenant that we have agreed on together, and the leaders of our country are especially obligated to honor that covenant. If we don't have people of virtue, the people who are committed to the constitutionalist covenant, then you have the only thing you have left is this checks and balances. But those checks and balances are vulnerable. They're especially vulnerable to partisanship and polarization, and we're seeing also to fear. So no covenantalism, no constitutionalism, no virtue, hyperpartisanship. The checks and balances are strained, really strained.
We are closing out. I'm going to take 2 more questions here that have been submitted. How are faiths other than Christianity in the U.S. responding to the Christian authoritarian interventions in civic and government affairs? How are faiths other than Christianity responding?
I'm seeing in the ecumenical and interfaith world a tremendous concern, partly because a lot of the most powerful voices in this movement are explicitly, you might call them establishmentarian Christian. And so the idea of, here's just a little story. When Barack Obama was president, he established religious advisors. I was in that conversation. I was for a while an advisor. The principle of Obama's Council of Religious Advisors was essentially everybody gets a seat at the table and nobody gets more than one. So his vision was Jewish, Muslim, etc., all the way around the table, right? That reflected a vision of a multi-faith America. It is explicitly repudiated by a lot of people in the current regime. And so that's got to be incredibly uncomfortable for people of other religions, unless that minority are attracted to the reactionary moral agenda. And that would be maybe ultra-conservative folks in some of the other religions as well, but it would definitely be a small minority.
What I'd like to do is I'm going to pass the microphone back and we're going to go down the line. Any concluding thoughts? Something that's bringing forth for you now, or you heard earlier you want to go back to? Then we'll thank our presenters tonight, and certainly thank you all for being here and those who join us streaming. But we'll pass it down the line. Any concluding thoughts tonight? This has been robust discussion. I appreciate the questions that have been submitted to. We will get to all of them. But Dr. Gushing, let's let you lead off.
Can I go last?
first day of my graduate seminar, Tom Dixon, great political scientist, told everyone, he goes, let me tell you folks, you can study political science, you cannot study political science without history. You have to know history, but you can certainly study history without political science. So so let's leave on a good note, okay? So everything, there's nothing kinetic, there's nothing static, everything is kinetic, everything moves, okay? And I was reflecting, we had dinner last night, it was a wonderful time, and I was reflecting on my talk, and I was reflecting on what David and what Mark had said. We were just talking about serious concerns, and we're all concerned with this, okay? But here's the thing, and I think this is the thing, that we've been through a heck of a lot worse, okay? We've been through a lot worse, and ultimately, we created this, and we're going to get ourselves out of this, okay? But it takes courage. It takes a willingness to roll your sleeves up, figuratively, literally as well, and to get that work done. And I was just thinking about this. Why, I'm writing about immigration, and I shared with you, our long history of immigration. So I would argue the ICE rates notwithstanding, because that is purposeful cruelty right there. It is a sin, it is wrong, it is the absolute worst when you're treating people, you're enforcing laws like these laws are somehow morally absolute. This is how Stephen Miller sees these things, right? Law and enforcement is public policy, right? Policy is fungible, right? And when we see this, when Americans see this, we're rightly, and we know this because you have the majority of Americans want immigration control, but the majority of Americans are opposed to this inhumane treatment, right? And it's not an either or, right? So the point I want to make is that, and that's the reason why I gave some of the examples purposely in my talk, is that when it comes to immigration, and that's just what I'm talking about, it was a lot worse. It was a lot worse for a lot of people over time. I'm thinking about this big, beautiful building here. Consider this. This building was constructed between 1897 and 1900. Pope Leo XIII brought in Sister Greene to come in to minister to the Irish and to the Polish and to the Italian immigrants and so forth and so on. There was a wave of anti-Catholicism in this town. Tom Watson, writing in the Jeffersonian, and this church body and this community came together and they formed the Catholic Laymen's Association right at the birth of the Second Klan. The Second Klan started in 1915. In 1916, the Catholic community in Augusta and Macon and Savannah and around, they stood up and said, "You're not going to tell us what we are. We're going to push back." And they did so within a democratic framework. They did it through ideas, right? And it was the same thing with Dr. King and SNCC and SCLC. The same thing. Good ideas will always win out. But the whole idea is that you have to have the discussion in order to have those ideas. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
I've been ecstatic working with these two and Sid tonight, and last night, like you mentioned, we got together and had a wonderful time. I always feel like there's hope. Jane Goodall passed away just recently. We were talking about her earlier tonight, and she would always say that there's hope, always hope. And I think about that with the environment. Nature seems to always come back. I've seen areas where they've been completely stripped, land has been stripped of all vegetation, it's been mined, or trees have been completely excavated and wiped out. And then with some care and some love, it comes back. The earth is trying to survive just like we are. These other creatures are just trying to survive just like we are.
So with all of us inside of our hearts, if we believe that, if we believe in other life that's here, I think there's always hope.
I think it's hard to know what to do if you don't know what you're dealing with. So I am aiming, all of us are aiming. Our talks really went well together. I'm grateful for my colleagues here. Kind of like zooming in on immigration, zooming in on the environment, all part of the same story. I think America is a long history of arguments between progressive and retrogressive forces. The immigration argument is a great example, but also race and just about everything else, women's equality, environment. And from my left liberal perspective, when the progressive side is in the ascendancy, it can get pretty ugly. But I also, like you were saying about what a public opinion polling is showing about immigration enforcement right now, there is a basic baseline decency in the majority of the American people, partly because I think God put moral capacity in all of us. And when they see cruelty, they know it's wrong. A majority almost always will know that it's wrong. So this current government is really ruling as a minority government. It doesn't have partly 40% of the population support on many issues. It's well under that. The damage being done to democratic norms and to lots of groups and individuals is real. But instead of throwing up our hands in despair, I do think calling things by their right name and then re-articulating progressive values as best we can, protecting democratic norms and being willing to take a risk for it, and trying to throw a bridge across to the other side, to the people who are reachable on the other side, to have conversations. That's what I proposed as my action steps, and I still hold to that. But we have to call things by the right name. We can't run away. And we have to be the best version of ourselves right now. There have been times that have been worse in America, but a few times in which democratic norms and culture have been more friendly. And so let's put our shoulders to the plow and do the best that we can. Thank you.
The Catholic influence in our architecture here and some viewing maybe that's been going on. St. Augustine had the great line that we can hate the sin but love the sinner. And if that sounds too churchy for you or religious, what it means is we can reject ideology, we can reject inappropriate behavior, but still love the person in toto. It's not a contradiction. Secondly, Nietzsche had that great line too, and fight the dragon, make sure you don't become the dragon. And I'm hearing that from our respondents tonight, that you want to stay at a certain level and don't descend into maybe where the slings and arrows are coming from. Last but not least, when I get really down about some things going on in the community and the world, I pull out a bit of prose, which you can Google very easily, but Howard Zinn, who started out at Spelman and then ended up at Boston University, has a great bit of prose entitled The Optimism of Uncertainty. And listen to that title, The Optimism of Uncertainty. And getting back to something to Dr. Harris, you were just saying, we've had bad times in this country, really bad times. The Civil War, 600,000 plus killed. It's tough right now, and I'm not, you can't go that, and you're not either. But let's take heart in what this country has come through, what we've transcended, how we redefined ourselves, holding on to some traditions and tenets, sure, but not being afraid of modernity either and the need to change. You all have been great. I want to thank our streaming audience as well. Thank you for coming out tonight. And as Joyce was saying earlier, dare to maybe not let this title offend you or set you off in any negative kind of way. I want to thank our keynote, Dr. David Gushee, once again for his erudite words, Dr. Paul Harris from Auburn University, Of course, my alma mater, the University of Georgia, is playing Auburn this weekend. I'm the chaplain for the Georgia Bulldog Club here in Augusta, so we're going to have some fun rivalry talk about that. Mark Albertson, thank you so much. You are so respected in this community and beyond for your work. Thank you all once again. Mark Albertson has some of his books about concussion as well.
The full pan. Everybody smile. All right. All right. Let's fade to black. It's on the Sacred Hearts YouTube channel. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, the sound is probably not the echo.
I can hear it, yeah.
You know, but we got, I mean, that's about the only comments we got on there was